Give your sister your house or consider yourself disowned." My mother slid a single crisp sheet of paper across the white linen tablecloth. It was my 28th birthday dinner. We sat in a leather booth inside the finest steakhouse in downtown Indianapolis. The air smelled of roasted garlic and expensive red wine. I had arrived early and handed the maitre d' my credit card to cover the entire evening, wanting to treat my family to a nice night out. Instead of a toast or a thoughtful gift, my mother Brenda was pushing a blank quitclaim deed toward my plate. I stared at the legal document. The printed text demanded the immediate transfer of my newly purchased 4-bedroom suburban home. Across the table, my 25-year-old sister Tiffany adjusted her designer cardigan and offered me a lazy smirk. She stirred her cocktail, the ice clinking against the glass. "My new lifestyle coaching business is really taking off, Rashima," Tiffany said, checking her reflection in the blade of her butter knife. "I need a larger space to host my elite client retreats. An apartment just does not project success. You are single. You just analyze spreadsheets all day. You do not need all that square footage." My lungs felt tight, but I forced my breathing to remain steady. For 3 years, I had worked exhausting 60-hour weeks as a forensic accountant. I spent my days untangling corporate fraud and scrutinizing complex ledgers to save enough for my down payment. I earned every single brick of that property. Tiffany, meanwhile, had quit 4 different entry-level jobs in the past 2 years because she felt creatively stifled. "I am not signing over my home," I said, my voice quiet but firm. My father Richard leaned forward, his jaw clenched and his knuckles turned white. His fist hit the table, rattling the silverware and causing heads to turn at the adjacent booths. "Your sister needs a solid foundation to launch her career," he said, his tone dripping with cold authority. "We are a family. Family provides. You either pick up that pen and sign that paper right now, or you can walk out that door and do not ever come back." My mother crossed her arms, fixing me with a stern, expectant glare. They sat there, waiting for the usual routine. They expected tears. They expected me to panic apologize and cave to their demands, just like I had done every time Tiffany needed bailing out of a self-inflicted disaster. They mistook my long history of patience for permanent weakness. I looked at the 3 of them, my father's rigid posture, my mother's cold calculation, Tiffany's entitled grin. I did not cry. I did not beg for their approval. I did not waste my breath explaining the value of hard work to people who only understood how to take from others. I carefully folded my cloth napkin and set it beside my untouched slice of chocolate cake. I stood up and pushed my chair in, keeping my spine perfectly straight. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner," I told them. I turned my back and walked out of the crowded dining room. The heavy brass door of the restaurant swung shut behind me, cutting off the noise of the patrons and the suffocating weight of my parents' demands. I stepped into the cool, sharp Indiana night air and pulled my car keys from my purse. If you enjoy intense family drama stories of revenge and self-respect, please take a second to hit the subscribe button to the Grape Vengeance channel and let me know your age and where you are watching from in the comments below. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket the moment I reached the parking lot. I glanced at the illuminated screen. It was a fraud alert notification from my bank. Before I stood up from the table while my father was delivering his grand ultimatum, I had quietly opened my banking app under the table and locked the credit card I had left with the waiter. I pictured the scene inside. Tiffany, believing she had just won a major victory, was undoubtedly trying to order an expensive bottle of champagne on my tab to celebrate her new house. Instead, the waiter would inform them the card was declined. My parents would have to dig into their own pockets to cover the prime cuts of steak and top-shelf drinks they had ordered on my dime. They thought walking away meant I surrendered. They believed kicking me out of the family was the ultimate punishment. What they failed to realize was that as a forensic accountant, I had spent the last several years quietly observing and documenting their disastrous financial habits. I knew secrets about their money that they thought were buried forever. My father told me not to come back. I had zero intentions of returning to that table. I drove away from the restaurant, the streetlights passing over my windshield. My family thought they were tossing me aside to secure Tiffany's future. They had no idea they had just handed me the keys to my own freedom, setting the stage for a financial reckoning that would shatter their comfortable illusion of superiority once and for all. The drive back to my neighborhood was quiet. The streetlights illuminated the empty Indiana roads, casting shadows across the dashboard of my reliable 5-year-old sedan. I did not turn on the radio. I enjoyed the silence. For my entire life, my family had filled every space with noise demands and manufactured emergencies. Now there was only the hum of my tires on the pavement. I pulled into the driveway of my 4-bedroom house. The motion sensor security lights flickered on, illuminating the brick facade and the neat landscaping I tended to myself every Sunday morning. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish. My home was my sanctuary. I had sacrificed vacations, new clothes, and countless weekends to save the 20% down payment required to hold the deed in my own name. My parents thought they could erase all that sacrifice by sliding a printed form across a steakhouse table. I hung my coat in the hall closet and walked straight to my home office. I bypassed the light switch, preferring the glow of the desk lamp. I pressed the power button on my computer tower and watched the dual monitors flare to life. My mother and father often mocked my profession. They called accounting boring. They told their friends I was just a glorified calculator. They did not understand what a forensic accountant actually does. I do not just tally receipts. I track hidden assets. I uncover paper trails meant to deceive. I find the truth buried beneath layers of lies. Numbers do not care about your feelings. Numbers do not manipulate you into feeling guilty. Numbers simply tell the story of your choices. And I had been quietly tracking my parents' choices for a very long time. I opened a secure, encrypted folder on my desktop. I typed in a complex password and opened a master spreadsheet. 6 years ago, my father had asked me to help him prepare his annual tax return. He handed me a shoebox full of crumpled receipts and bank statements, expecting me to magically lower his tax burden. While organizing his chaos, I noticed severe discrepancies. I saw the exorbitant credit card balances. I saw the hidden personal loans. Instead of confronting him, I built this spreadsheet. Over the years, I updated it by cross-referencing public property records, monitoring the credit profiles I was unfortunately linked to, and analyzing the breadcrumbs of their spending habits. I stared at the red digits glowing on my screen. My parents were drowning. Their total debt hovered just over $450,000. The breakdown was a masterpiece of financial incompetence. They had drained $150,000 from a home equity line of credit. They had taken heavy penalties to borrow $200,000 against their own retirement accounts. The remaining $100,000 was spread across 5 different premium credit cards, all carrying suffocating interest rates. They were hemorrhaging money just to maintain the illusion of upper-middle-class wealth, and the primary cause of that hemorrhage was Tiffany. My sister had never held a job for more than 4 months. Whenever she quit, she claimed her boss was toxic or the environment lacked creative vision. Then she would pivot to a new passion project. 3 years ago, it was a vegan skincare line. My parents funded $50,000 in inventory that ended up expiring in their garage. 2 years ago, it was a boutique fitness app that required expensive software developers. My parents paid for that too. Now it was her lifestyle coaching business. Looking at the red numbers on my screen, a chilling realization washed over me. The scene at the restaurant suddenly made perfect sense. They did not just want my house so Tiffany could have a nicer office. They needed my house because they were out of cash. They could no longer afford to fund Tiffany's delusions. If they could bully me into signing over my property, Tiffany would have a free place to live. My parents could then sell their own heavily mortgaged home, downsize, and use the remaining equity to stop their creditors from circling. They were trying to use my life savings as a life raft for their sinking ship. I opened a new tab on my web browser and navigated to the management portal for Tiffany's luxury apartment complex in downtown Indianapolis. 2 years ago, during a moment of foolish familial guilt, my mother had wept in my kitchen, begging me to co-sign Tiffany's lease. She claimed Tiffany just needed a safe neighborhood to get on her feet. Because my credit score was pristine, the landlord approved the application instantly. I was listed as the emergency financial guarantor. I logged into the tenant portal using the emergency access credentials. A bright yellow banner flashed across the top of the screen. Past due. Tiffany had not paid her rent in 3 months. The total arrears, including late fees, sat at $15,000. According to the document repository in the portal, the landlord had already issued a final warning. An official eviction filing was imminent. I felt my jaw tighten. My parents knew Tiffany was about to be thrown out onto the street. Instead of holding her accountable, they decided the best solution was to steal my home and hand her the keys. I navigated to the guarantor section of the portal. I downloaded the formal release forms. The contract stipulated that a guarantor could withdraw support if the primary tenant defaulted on the payment schedule. Tiffany had clearly defaulted. I filled out the digital paperwork attached, the required identification, and typed a brief clinical note to the property manager, officially severing my liability for the unit. I clicked Submit. The screen refreshed. A green check mark appeared confirming my release. I was no longer legally bound to her apartment. When the landlord moved forward with the eviction, Tiffany would face the consequences entirely on her own. But I was not finished. I opened another tab and went to the auto lender portal. My parents drove matching German luxury SUVs. My father insisted that a man of his stature needed to drive a high-end vehicle to command respect in the business world. When they leased the cars, their credit was already slipping. They pressured me into acting as a secondary co-signer to secure a Tier 1 interest rate. I accessed the account dashboard. Just like the apartment, the car payments were delinquent. They were 60 days behind on both vehicles. I knew the terms of this contract intimately. As a co-signer, I had the right to demand an immediate refinance or surrender of the assets if the primary borrowers failed to maintain the payment schedule in good standing. I drafted a formal notification to the lending institution. I informed them I was withdrawing my backing due to the primary borrower's default, and I authorized them to take whatever collection actions they deemed necessary to secure their property. I hit send. Another green check mark. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair and took a deep breath. The silence of my home felt different now. It felt fortified. I had just pulled the financial rug out from under my entire family, and I had not raised my voice once. I did not send them an angry text message. I did not call my mother to argue. I let the automated banking systems do the talking. The algorithms in the collection departments were about to handle my family with the exact lack of emotion they deserved. I reached for my phone and opened my banking application. I navigated to the Shared Permissions tab. I deleted my checking account routing numbers from my parents' auto-pay profiles. I canceled the emergency credit card I had given my mother years ago for groceries. I watched the accounts unlink one by one. The digital ties that bound me to their chaos evaporated into the ether. They thought they had all the power at that dinner table. They thought they could command me to surrender my life. They had no idea that by trying to force my hand, they had only accelerated their own ruin. I turned off my monitors and stood up from the desk. I walked into my kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. I looked out the window at my quiet backyard. The tension in my shoulders began to dissolve. The financial guillotine had been released. It was only a matter of time before the blade dropped. I set my glass in the sink and headed down the hall to my bedroom, ready to get the best night of sleep I had experienced in years. Tomorrow, the automated systems would process my requests. The day after that, the property managers and the auto lenders would take action. The clock was ticking, and my sister was completely unaware that her luxurious, carefree existence was about to come crashing through her front door. 3 days passed. 72 hours of profound silence. In my family, giving someone the silent treatment was a weapon. My mother used it to punish disobedience. My father used it to enforce his strict authority over the household. This time, the silence belonged to me. I woke up at my usual time. I went to my office. I analyzed complex corporate ledgers. I drank my morning coffee on my cedar deck. I slept 8 undisturbed hours each night. Meanwhile, across town, the manufactured reality my parents built to protect my sister was beginning to fracture. Tiffany spent her Thursday afternoon lounging on our parents' front porch. She sat on the expensive wicker patio furniture my father bought on credit, sipping an iced matcha latte. Her smartphone was mounted on a ring light tripod. She was adjusting her designer sweater, preparing to record a motivational video for her non-existent lifestyle coaching clients. Tiffany truly believed my absence from the family was just a temporary tantrum. She told my father I was simply embarrassed about my selfish behavior at the steakhouse. She expected me to pull into the driveway at any moment, crying, carrying a peace offering, and ready to sign over the deed to my home. That was the only dynamic she understood. She demanded things. I provided the funding, and my parents applauded her ambition. She never had to face the real world. 2 years ago, when her boutique fitness app failed, she locked herself in her bedroom for a week. My parents begged me to cover her server hosting fees so she would not feel like a failure. I paid it to keep the peace. Tiffany assumed I would always pay to keep the peace. A vehicle turned onto the quiet suburban street. It was not my 5-year-old sedan. It was a sleek black town car with heavily tinted windows. The vehicle rolled to a smooth stop directly in front of my parents' mailbox. The engine idled quietly. Tiffany lowered her oversized sunglasses. A smug smirk spread across her face. Her delusion ran so deep she honestly thought I had hired a private luxury car service to deliver my apology in style. She tapped the record button on her phone screen, wanting to capture my inevitable surrender to broadcast to her social media followers. She sat up straight and practiced a look of generous, condescending forgiveness. The rear passenger door remained shut. Instead, the driver's side door opened. A tall man wearing a sharp gray suit stepped onto the pavement. He did not look like a chauffeur. He carried a thick, sealed manila envelope. He walked up the driveway with purposeful, heavy strides. Tiffany felt her fake smile falter. The man stopped at the bottom of the porch stairs. He looked at a clipboard, then looked up at my sister. He asked if she was Tiffany Garcia. Tiffany nodded, her phone still recording every second of the interaction. The man handed her the thick envelope. He stated she had been officially served. He turned on his heel, walked back to the town car, and drove away. Tiffany tore open the seal. She expected a groveling letter from me, or perhaps the signed quitclaim deed for my house. Instead, she pulled out a stack of dense legal paperwork bearing the official seal of Marion County. The top sheet was a 72-hour pay-or-quit eviction notice. The bold black letters demanded $15,000 in back rent for her luxury downtown loft. Attached was a formal letter from the property management company. It stated that her emergency guarantor had legally withdrawn all financial backing due to severe default. Without my pristine credit profile shielding her, the landlord was demanding immediate payment in full. If the balance remained unpaid by Monday morning, the county sheriff would execute a forced removal. Tiffany felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands began to shake. She flipped to the second packet of papers. It was a notice of default and an active repossession order for her leased luxury SUV. The auto lender had terminated the contract. The letter warned that recovery agents were already dispatched to locate the vehicle. She looked toward the driveway where her pristine vehicle sat. She realized she no longer owned it. She did not even have the right to drive it to the grocery store. The papers slipped from her trembling fingers. The pages scattered across the wooden porch boards, fluttering in the afternoon breeze. The phone dropped from her other hand, clattering against the wicker table. The camera was still recording, capturing her panic. The financial shield she took for granted was gone. I had cut the strings, and she was in a free fall without a parachute. She scrambled to grab her phone, ending the video recording, and dialed our mother with frantic, clumsy taps. When Brenda answered, Tiffany was hyperventilating. She screamed that the landlord was coming to throw her designer furniture onto the sidewalk. She shrieked that her car was going to be towed away in the middle of the night. She begged our mother to fix it. Brenda told her to calm down. My mother promised to just put the past due rent on her emergency credit card to make the problem go away. Brenda told Tiffany to hold the line while she logged into the apartment portal to submit the payment. Brenda typed in her card numbers, confident that my bank account would absorb the blow just like it always did. The transaction declined. Brenda tried again. Declined. The panic in my mother's voice matched my sister's when she realized the card was dead. Brenda quickly logged into the primary banking application on her phone to check the joint balances. The screen displayed an error message. Her login credentials were no longer authorized. The emergency credit card was disabled. The auto-pay links were severed. The realization hit them both at the same time. The bank account was sealed shut. Their leverage was gone. They could not spend their way out of this problem using my money. They were staring down the barrel of a $15,000 debt with zero cash in their own checking accounts. But rather than admit defeat or take responsibility for her unpaid bills, my sister decided to escalate the situation. She was cornered, and cornered people rarely apologize. Instead, they attack. Tiffany wiped the tears from her face and formulated a plan. If she could not bully me into paying her bills in private, she would force me to pay them in public. She prepared to use the only manipulative tactic she had left in her arsenal. She was about to manufacture a brand new medical crisis, one designed to force my hand and publicly destroy my professional reputation. My smartphone buzzed against the polished mahogany surface of my desk. I was reviewing a quarterly audit for a local manufacturing client when the screen illuminated. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. I let it ring. For the past 24 hours, Brenda had tried calling me 12 separate times. My father had attempted 5 calls. I answered none of them. When the ringing stopped, a small icon appeared indicating a new voicemail. I set down my pen, picked up the device, and pressed play. I held the speaker to my ear, keeping my eyes fixed on the spreadsheet in front of me. Brenda did not bother with a greeting. Her voice echoed through the tiny speaker, frantic and shrill. She was breathing heavily, intentionally projecting an aura of sheer terror. She informed me that my sister was currently lying in a hospital bed at a downtown Indianapolis emergency room. According to my mother, Tiffany had suffered a severe, debilitating panic attack. Brenda claimed the doctors were running tests on Tiffany's heart, suggesting the stress of the past few days had caused permanent physical damage. Then came the pivot. The emotional setup always preceded the financial demand. Brenda's tone shifted from frightened to furious. She screamed into the receiver, accusing me of putting my own sister in the hospital. She blamed my cruel, selfish behavior for triggering Tiffany's collapse. Finally, she delivered the ultimatum. She demanded I immediately wire $5,000 to cover the emergency medical bills. If I refused to send the funds within the hour, Brenda declared that Tiffany's blood would be on my hands forever. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I placed the phone back onto my desk. My pulse did not elevate. My hands remained steady. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt because I knew this routine intimately. My sister possessed a remarkable talent for developing sudden, mysterious illnesses whenever she faced the consequences of her own actions. During our junior year of high school, Tiffany was caught plagiarizing a final term paper. Facing a failing grade and a suspension, she conveniently developed crippling migraines that kept her bedridden for 2 weeks. My parents marched into the principal's office, claiming the school's rigorous academic pressure had broken their fragile daughter. They threatened a lawsuit. The school quietly dropped the suspension and allowed Tiffany to retake the class. The pattern never changed. Sickness was Tiffany's ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. As a forensic accountant, I view the world through the lens of numbers and logic. My mother's voicemail was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, but it was a mathematical failure. I knew how emergency rooms operated in the state of Indiana. Hospitals do not demand a $5,000 wire transfer up front before treating a panic attack. They take your insurance information, stabilize the patient, and send a bill in the mail weeks later. The $5,000 had nothing to do with medical care. It was the exact amount Tiffany needed to satisfy the immediate legal threshold of her eviction notice and secure a lawyer to stall the repossession of her leased SUV. They were using a fake medical crisis to extort me into paying her past due rent. I tapped the screen and deleted the voicemail. I did not send a text. I did not wire a single dime. I returned my attention to the manufacturing audit, letting the silence serve as my only response. When a manipulator realizes their usual tactics no longer work, they do not self-reflect. They escalate. The following morning, I arrived at my accounting firm located in the business district of Indianapolis. The office was a quiet sanctuary of glass walls, gray carpeting, and hushed conversations. My firm handled high-net-worth individuals and corporate fraud investigations. Our entire business model relied on absolute discretion, integrity, and trust. If a forensic accountant loses their pristine reputation, they lose their career. I poured my morning coffee in the break room and walked back to my office. My computer monitor was already glowing. Before I could open my email client, my colleague David knocked on my open door. He held his tablet in his hands, his expression tight with discomfort. He did not say good morning. He stepped inside and gently closed the glass door behind him. David placed the tablet on my desk. He asked if I had checked my professional networking profiles yet today. I shook my head, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I strictly used LinkedIn for connecting with corporate attorneys and industry peers. I rarely checked the feed. David tapped the screen. A video began to play. It was Tiffany. She was sitting upright in a sterile hospital bed, dressed in a faded blue patient gown. Her hair was intentionally messy, and her mascara was smeared beneath her eyes, giving her a hollow, fragile appearance. She looked directly into the camera, her lower lip trembling. The video was posted publicly on her LinkedIn profile, a platform designed specifically for business networking. She had not posted this on a casual social media site for her friends to see. She chose the exact forum where my clients, my colleagues, and my managing partners spent their time. Tiffany began to speak, her voice cracking with calculated sorrow. She introduced herself to her professional network, claiming her lifestyle coaching business was temporarily suspended due to a severe family tragedy. She wiped a fake tear from her cheek. Then she looked into the lens and delivered a performance designed to destroy my life. She accused me by name of orchestrating a campaign of severe financial abuse against our elderly parents. She spun a fabricated narrative, claiming I had used my specialized accounting knowledge to trick our father into signing over his retirement funds. She told the camera that I was hoarding the family wealth while leaving my parents destitute. The lies grew bolder. She pointed to her hospital gown and declared she was suffering from a chronic, debilitating condition. She labeled herself a disabled woman. She wept openly, stating that her wealthy sister had callously abandoned her in her darkest hour, refusing to help cover life-saving medical treatments. Tiffany did not just mention my name. In the caption below the video, she explicitly tagged the official corporate page of my accounting firm. She wrote a lengthy paragraph questioning how a prestigious financial institution could employ someone who systematically defrauded their own vulnerable family members. The video already had several dozen shares and hundreds of comments from outraged strangers. People were calling for my immediate termination. Some demanded I be investigated by the state licensing board. Tiffany was actively encouraging the digital mob to contact my employer. David took his tablet back, his eyes searching my face for an explanation. He quietly suggested I speak with the managing partners before they saw the post themselves. My sister had realized that throwing a tantrum on the front porch would not unlock my bank accounts. Because I refused to fund her private failures, she decided to burn down my public livelihood. Accusations of elder abuse and financial exploitation were a death sentence for a certified fraud examiner. Tiffany knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to create a public relations nightmare so terrifying that I would surrender my house and my savings just to make her delete the video. She thought I would panic to save my job. I looked at the blank wall of my office. The private family drama had evaporated. This was no longer a dispute over a suburban house or an unpaid apartment lease. This was a direct, malicious strike against my professional credentials, my income, and the career I had spent nearly a decade building from the ground up. I thanked David for bringing the post to my attention. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the encrypted flash drive containing the master spreadsheet of my parents' actual debts, along with the digital copies of Tiffany's eviction notices. My sister wanted to bring my corporate world into our family dispute. She wanted to weaponize my accounting firm against me. She failed to realize that by dragging my employer into her manufactured crisis, she had just invited a team of ruthless corporate attorneys to scrutinize every single lie she had ever told. I picked up the flash drive, straightened my blazer, and walked out of my office, heading straight toward the executive boardroom. I walked into the executive suite of our downtown Indianapolis building. The mahogany double doors of the managing partner's office stood wide open. Harrison stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray city skyline. He wore a tailored navy suit and held a ceramic coffee mug. He did not turn around immediately. My firm handled wealth management for local politicians, corporate executives, and elite business owners. Discretion was our primary currency. We sold trust. Scandals were dealt with swiftly and without mercy. Harrison finally turned and gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. He sat down and folded his hands over a printed screenshot. He stated that the Human Resources Department had received over 40 emails in the past hour. Clients and strangers alike were forwarding a video posted by my sister. He kept his tone neutral, but his eyes searched my face for any sign of panic or guilt. He asked me to explain why a woman wearing a hospital gown was accusing me of elder abuse on a platform where our top clients conduct daily business. I did not apologize for the distraction. I did not cry. I reached into my briefcase and placed an encrypted flash drive onto his glass desk. Beside it, I laid a pristine manila folder I had printed just moments before walking upstairs. I opened the folder. I spread the documents across his desk like playing cards. I laid out the 72-hour eviction notice from Tiffany's landlord. I presented the active vehicle repossession order. I pulled out the detailed financial ledger, highlighting my parents' hidden debts, the defaulted loans, and the maxed-out credit limits. Finally, I placed a transcript of the voicemail my mother had left outlining the fraudulent emergency room tactic they attempted to use to extract $5,000 from my checking account. I looked Harrison in the eye. I told him that my family had demanded I sign over the deed to my house. When I refused, they lost their safety net. The video was a desperate extortion attempt disguised as a medical emergency. Harrison adjusted his reading glasses. He leaned forward and reviewed the documents. He looked at the dates, the default notices, and the clear paper trail of my financial independence. He was a seasoned auditor who spent his life hunting for hidden truth. He recognized a shakedown instantly. He closed the folder, took off his glasses, and let out a sharp sigh. He noted that family disputes were private matters. However, he pointed out that Tiffany had explicitly tagged the firm's corporate profile. She had weaponized our brand to lend credibility to her lies. By demanding my termination in a public forum, she crossed the line from a private family nuisance to a direct corporate liability. Harrison pressed a button on his intercom. He asked the head of our legal department to step into the office immediately. 10 minutes later, 3 corporate attorneys sat around the desk. They did not view Tiffany as a grieving sick sister. They viewed her as a hostile entity attempting to damage a multi-million-dollar financial institution. They reviewed the video and the evidence I provided. The lead counsel did not hesitate. He drafted a formal response on his laptop right then and there. They did not politely ask Tiffany to take the video down. They issued a ruthless cease and desist order, printed on heavy corporate letterhead. The document outlined a pending defamation lawsuit demanding $500,000 in punitive damages. It stated that if the video was not deleted within 1 hour of receipt, and if a public retraction was not issued by the end of the business day, the firm would move to seize all her remaining assets and garnish her future wages for the next 20 years. They dispatched a private courier directly to her hospital room. I thanked Harrison and walked back to my desk. My job was secure. My firm was actively protecting me, but my sister had tried to take away my livelihood. She had tried to render me unemployable in my home state. I decided it was time to apply that same level of scrutiny to her own career. Tiffany constantly boasted online about her lucrative lifestyle coaching business. She posted screenshots of client payments, flaunted designer purchases, and bragged about her independent wealth to attract desperate followers. I opened a new browser window and began cross-referencing her public claims with state registry databases. As a fraud examiner, spotting discrepancies is second nature. I searched the Indiana Secretary of State portal. Tiffany had never registered a formal business entity. She possessed no valid business license. More importantly, the income she bragged about on social media did not match the destitute financial profile she presented to her landlord. She was operating an unregistered business and funneling client payments through personal cash transfer applications to avoid paying taxes. I compiled a list of her public posts noting the exact dates and the boasted revenue amounts. I took screenshots of her demanding payments through unsecured digital platforms. I packaged this digital footprint into a clean, concise, undeniable report. I navigated to the official reporting portal for the Internal Revenue Service. I filled out a formal tip regarding suspected tax evasion and unreported income, attaching the public evidence she had so generously provided to the internet. Next, I contacted the fraud departments of the 3 major digital payment processors she used to collect money from her gullible clients. I submitted the same evidence, noting that she was utilizing personal accounts for unregistered commercial enterprises, which was a direct violation of their strict terms of service. Algorithms work faster than human empathy. Within 2 hours, Tiffany's payment processors triggered automatic security protocols. They locked her accounts pending a full identity and business verification process. Every single dollar she had collected from her online followers was frozen. She could not withdraw funds to pay for food. She could not accept new payments. Her lifestyle coaching business was instantly paralyzed by the cold, hard application of the law. My phone remained silent, but my computer screen told the entire story. I refreshed her profile page. The public video vanished. The frantic deletion proved the courier had delivered the firm's lawsuit threat straight to her hospital bed. Tiffany had tried to destroy my career with a fabricated story. In response, the undeniable facts had dismantled her fake empire. She was sitting in a hospital room facing eviction, a repossessed car, a corporate lawsuit, and a frozen income stream. The financial guillotine had fallen, severing her from the unearned luxury she believed was her birthright. I finished my workday, packed my briefcase, and drove home. I expected a barrage of angry text messages. I anticipated my father leaving threatening voicemails. Instead, the evening was unnervingly quiet. The silence did not mean they had surrendered. It meant they realized brute force and public humiliation had failed. My parents could no longer bully me into submission. I had proven that I held all the cards. They needed a new strategy. If they could not take my house by force, they would try to take it by deception. The following morning, I sat in the lobby of my office building, sipping a black coffee before heading upstairs. The glass revolving doors spun, bringing a rush of crisp morning air into the atrium. 2 familiar figures walked inside. My father wore a wrinkled button-down shirt. His shoulders slumped, and he looked 10 years older than he had at the steakhouse. My mother walked beside him, clutching a small, pathetic bouquet of grocery store flowers. They did not march toward me with anger. They approached slowly, wearing expressions of deep, exhausted sorrow. My father stopped a few feet away. He offered a weak, trembling smile. He spoke in a soft voice, claiming they had made a terrible mistake and just wanted 5 minutes to apologize and mend our broken family. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, nodding in agreement. They looked like defeated, desperate parents seeking forgiveness. But as my eyes tracked down to the single manila envelope clutched tightly in my father's left hand, my instincts flared. The war was not over. It was simply shifting from the battlefield to the shadows. My father stood near the security desk of my office building atrium. The morning rush hour swirled around him, business professionals carrying briefcases and scanning their badges. Richard did not belong in this polished environment. He wore a faded gray jacket that hung loosely off his shoulders. His posture was intentionally slouched. In his left hand, he held a cheap bouquet of mixed carnations, wrapped in crinkling clear plastic. My mother stood half a step behind him, clutching the strap of her worn leather purse like a lifeline. They looked like 2 broken, elderly parents seeking redemption. I paused near the elevator banks, holding my black coffee. My forensic training taught me to analyze body language before listening to a single word a person says. A fraudster rarely approaches their target with arrogance. When their initial demands fail, they pivot to pity. They manufacture vulnerability to lower your defenses. I walked toward them slowly. My father raised his chin, his eyes wide and pleading. He offered the carnations with a trembling hand. I did not take the flowers. I stood firmly on the marble floor, keeping a safe distance. He swallowed hard and lowered the bouquet. He spoke in a hushed, raspy tone, begging for just 5 minutes of my time. He claimed he had not slept in 3 days. He told me the eviction notice and the repossession order had shattered their reality. According to him, they finally understood the depth of their mistakes. My mother dabbed the corners of her eyes with a crumpled tissue, offering a weak, trembling nod. They asked if we could step into the cafe across the street. They promised they would not cause a scene. They just wanted to mend the family. I looked at the manila envelope tucked under my father's arm. The corner of a printed document peeked out from the flap. I knew this tactic. When I was 16 years old, my mother sat on the edge of my bed crying about the electric bill. She sobbed until I handed over my entire jar of babysitting money. They used guilt as a crowbar to pry open my wallet. They assumed I was still that naive teenager who would do anything to stop her parents from crying. I checked my watch. I had 20 minutes before my first client meeting. I nodded once and pointed toward the glass doors. We walked across the busy downtown street in silence. The morning air was sharp, biting at my cheeks. My parents shuffled their feet, playing the role of the defeated elders perfectly. We entered a crowded coffee shop on the corner. The loud hum of espresso machines and chattering customers provided a dense layer of background noise. This was a calculated choice on their part. Con artists always prefer noisy, distracting environments. The chaos prevents the victim from reading the fine print. We found a small circular table near the back window. I sat down and crossed my arms. My father placed the carnations on the empty fourth chair. He sat across from me, folding his hands on the sticky wooden surface. My mother sat beside him, pulling her sweater tight across her chest. Richard cleared his throat. He delivered a rehearsed speech about pride and foolishness. He admitted their financial situation was dire. He confessed that Tiffany had drained their savings and left them facing foreclosure on their own home. He looked me in the eye and said he was proud of my success. He called me the smart one, the daughter who actually figured out how the real world works. The flattery was thick, heavy, and entirely fake. Brenda took over the performance. She leaned forward, her voice cracking with raw emotion. She told me they were finally cutting Tiffany off. She claimed they were working with a local credit union to consolidate their suffocating debt into one manageable monthly payment. To do this, they needed to demonstrate family stability to the loan officer. My mother opened her purse and pulled out a blue ink pen. She placed it on the table. Then my father reached for the manila envelope. He slid a single sheet of paper across the wood. The document stopped inches from my hands. My father offered a warm, reassuring smile. He called it a standard character reference form. He explained that the bank simply needed a signature from a licensed financial professional, verifying that Richard and Brenda Garcia were upstanding citizens attempting to rectify their debts. "Just a formality, sweetheart," he whispered, pushing the blue pen closer to my fingers. "Just sign at the bottom and we will never bother you for money again." I did not pick up the pen. I kept my hands resting in my lap. I lowered my gaze to the paper. To the untrained eye, it looked like a generic banking form. The top of the page featured a generic logo and standard boilerplate text regarding debt consolidation. The font was small, designed to discourage the reader from actually processing the words. But I am not an untrained eye. I spend 40 hours a week hunting for hidden clauses, altered margins, and legal traps buried in corporate contracts. My brain automatically scans for discrepancies. I noticed the paper stock first. It was heavy-textured legal parchment. A standard community credit union does not print routine character references on premium legal stock. I scanned the first paragraph. The language was deliberately vague, discussing the restructuring of assets and the delegation of financial responsibilities. Then my eyes locked onto the third paragraph. The spacing between the lines tightened, squeezing more text into the block. I read the specific legal jargon hidden in the center of the page. The words fiduciary control jumped off the parchment. 2 sentences later, I spotted the phrase unrestricted access to all checking, savings, and investment accounts. My heart turned to ice. This was not a character reference. The document did not contain a single line about their personal integrity. It was a durable power of attorney. They had downloaded a binding legal template and altered the header to make it look like a loan document. If I picked up that blue pen and signed my name on the bottom line, I would be granting my father full legal authorization to act as my financial proxy. With that single signature, Richard could walk into my bank branch, present his driver's license, and drain my entire life savings. He could take out a second mortgage on my house. He could liquidate my retirement funds. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. They did not come to this coffee shop to apologize. They did not care about mending our broken relationship. They were desperate cornered animals. Since Tiffany's fake hospital stunt failed, and since the corporate lawsuit threat terrified them, they decided to resort to outright theft. They wanted to steal my house and my money in one swift stroke of a pen, leaving me bankrupt while they paid off their own reckless debts. My mother sniffled loudly, tapping her fingernail against the table. She urged me to hurry up, claiming the loan officer was waiting for the paperwork before his morning meeting. She tried to manufacture a sense of urgency, the final step in any successful scam. I sat back in my chair. The loud chatter of the coffee shop faded into the background. I looked at my mother's tear-stained cheeks. I looked at my father's warm, encouraging smile. They were looking right at me, waiting for their obedient daughter to fall into the trap and hand over her future. I slowly reached out and picked up the document. I did not reach for the pen. I held the heavy paper in both hands, feeling the weight of their ultimate betrayal. My father exhaled a short breath of relief, assuming he had won. He assumed I was too emotional, too eager for their love to actually read the fine print. He had no idea what was about to happen next. I held the heavy parchment between my fingers. Across the small circular table, my father settled back into his wooden chair. He let out a long breath, crossing his ankles beneath the table. He believed the hard work was over. In his mind, I remained the compliant daughter who fixed every disaster and funded every shortfall. He waited for the scratch of blue ink that would hand him the keys to my entire financial existence. My mother stared at the document, her hands folded tight, eyes wide with greedy anticipation. I did not scream. I did not throw my black coffee into his face, even though the urge burned hot in my chest. Revealing emotion gives a manipulator power. Silence is far more terrifying. Instead, I set the fake bank form flat on the sticky wooden surface. I unzipped the side compartment of my leather purse. I bypassed the cheap blue pen my father offered. I retrieved a thin red felt tip marker. It is the exact tool I use during corporate audits to flag fraudulent ledger entries. I clicked the cap off. The sound was sharp against the noisy backdrop of the crowded cafe. I pressed the red tip against the thick paper. I drew a bold, bright circle around the words, fiduciary control. The marker made a loud scratching noise. I moved down the page, drawing another thick red box around unrestricted access to all checking and investment accounts. I dragged a final red line straight through the fake header at the top of the page. Richard leaned forward, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. His warm tone faltered. He asked what I was doing, his voice tight. He reached across the table to snatch the paper away. I pulled the sheet out of his reach. I folded it neatly in half and slid the forged power of attorney directly into my purse. I zipped the compartment shut. I looked him dead in the eye. I informed him that attempting to trick a certified fraud examiner into signing away her legal rights is not just a moral failure, it is a Class 5 felony in the state of Indiana. I raised my index finger and pointed toward the ceiling. Directly above our table, a black dome security camera hung from the rafters. A tiny red recording light blinked steadily. I told them the lens was recording in high definition, capturing the exact moment they presented a fraudulent legal document to extort their own child. The warm, apologetic facade melted off my father's face. The charming, defeated elder routine vanished into thin air. His skin turned a pale, sickly gray. His jaw slacked. Genuine cold dread replaced his rehearsed sorrow. He realized I was not playing a game. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. She began stammering uncontrollably. Brenda bumped her knee against the table, rattling the coffee cups. She blamed the credit union, swearing the loan officer must have printed the wrong file. She claimed they had no idea what those legal terms meant, insisting they just downloaded a generic form from the internet to save time. I held up my hand, stopping her pathetic excuses. I reminded them that I track hidden assets for a living. I told them I knew they drafted this forgery in their home office last night. I knew they drove downtown with the explicit intent to rob me. Then I decided it was time to address a much older debt. The current conflict always connects to the sins of the past. 10 years ago, I worked 3 part-time jobs during high school. I bussed tables, tutored math, and stocked grocery shelves. I saved every paycheck to afford out-of-state college tuition, desperate to escape their chaotic household. 1 week before my high school graduation, I went to the bank to request a cashier check for my freshman dorm deposit. I found a zero balance. $12,000 had evaporated. My parents claimed the bank made a routing error and the money was lost in the system forever. They offered zero help. I was forced to abandon my dream school, attend a local community college, and take out high-interest student loans to survive. Only years later, while reviewing their tax returns, did I uncover the truth. They had forged my signature on a withdrawal slip, drained the account, and used my tuition money to buy Tiffany a premium show dog she abandoned 3 months later. I leaned across the cafe table, bringing my face close to theirs. I brought up the $12,000. I watched their eyes widen as they realized I knew about their decade-old theft. They had assumed that crime was permanently buried. I told them the statute of limitations for fraud is extended when the victim is a minor, and the perpetrators are the legal guardians who actively concealed the crime. I delivered my terms. I gave them exactly 24 hours to deposit $12,000 into my checking account. If the funds did not clear by tomorrow morning, I would walk straight into the district attorney office. I promised to hand over the fake power of attorney, the cafe security footage, and the historical banking records proving they stole my tuition money. My father tried to speak, but his voice failed. He choked on his own panic. He stuttered, pleading that they were broke. He reminded me their house was facing foreclosure and Tiffany was facing eviction. He begged me to be reasonable, asking how they could possibly generate that much cash in a single day. I stood up and pushed my chair in. I looked down at the people who had spent my entire life prioritizing my sister's comfort over my basic survival. I told them they better start pawning their matching German luxury vehicles. I suggested they sell my mother's designer jewelry collection. I told them I did not care how they found the money, only that the clock was officially ticking. I turned around and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving my untouched drink on the table. The power dynamic was entirely inverted. The parents who demanded my house at a steakhouse dinner were now trapped in a legal nightmare of their own making. They were racing against a ruthless deadline, terrified of the prison sentence hovering over their heads. As I walked back to my office building, I knew they would not find the cash. Cornered manipulators do not suddenly become responsible citizens. When they realize they cannot win by playing the victim, they attempt to burn the victim to the ground. Brenda was already reaching into her purse for her smartphone, preparing to make a desperate move that would escalate this war far beyond our family circle, setting a trap she mistakenly thought would put me behind bars. I drove home from the office with the windows rolled down, letting the crisp Indiana air clear my mind. The 24-hour countdown was officially ticking. I knew my parents did not possess $12,000. Their checking accounts were empty. Their credit cards were maxed out to the limit. They had exhausted every legitimate avenue for cash. When rational people are backed into a corner, they try to negotiate. Manipulators do not operate on logic. They operate on desperation. My mother always preferred to flip the board rather than admit she had lost the game. The evening sun dipped below the suburban tree line by the time I pulled into my driveway. I walked into my kitchen and began preparing a simple dinner of grilled chicken and roasted vegetables. The house was quiet. I felt a sense of calm washed over me. I had drawn my boundary. I had secured my assets. I believed the worst of the storm had passed. Then the heavy chime of my front doorbell shattered the silence. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the foyer. I checked the security monitor mounted on the wall. 2 uniformed police officers stood on my porch. A marked police cruiser was parked at the edge of my driveway, its lights off, but the engine idling. My chest tightened, a cold spike of adrenaline hitting my system. Having law enforcement show up at your door is jarring, even when you know you are innocent. This was the escalation. Brenda had realized she could not outsmart me financially in the shadows, so she decided to deploy the state to punish my disobedience in plain sight. I took a steadying breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the heavy wooden door open. The older officer introduced himself as Sergeant Miller. He asked to step inside, keeping his hand resting near his duty belt. His tone was not friendly. It was guarded, professional, and highly suspicious. The younger officer stood a few feet back, his eyes scanning my entryway. I stepped back and invited them into my living room. I offered them bottled water, which they quickly declined. I kept my posture relaxed and asked them how I could help. Sergeant Miller pulled a small leather notepad from his breast pocket. He informed me that 3 hours ago, a woman named Brenda Garcia filed an urgent report at the downtown precinct. According to my mother, I had visited her house earlier that week and systematically emptied their home safe. She claimed I stole thousands of dollars in cash, antique family heirlooms, and sensitive financial documents. The younger officer spoke up, adding that Brenda accused me of using my specialized financial knowledge to coerce them out of their life savings. She painted a picture of a cruel, wealthy daughter exploiting her vulnerable elderly parents. They were investigating grand theft and elder abuse. In the state of Indiana, those charges carry mandatory prison time. My mother wanted me locked in a cell. She wanted the police to tear my house apart, humiliate me in front of my neighbors, and drag me out in handcuffs. She figured the sheer terror of an arrest would force me to drop my demands for the stolen tuition money. She wanted to break my spirit using a badge and a gun. I did not raise my voice. I did not act outraged. I did not start crying or screaming about how unfair this was. I knew that defending yourself with too much emotion makes you look guilty to a trained investigator. I simply nodded and asked the officers to follow me down the hall into my home office. I knelt beside my heavy steel floor safe tucked beneath the window. I entered the numeric code, turned the handle, and pulled the heavy door open. Law enforcement officers deal with liars all day long. They recognize panic. They also recognize meticulous organization. I pulled out a thick fireproof binder and set it on the center of my desk. I opened it to the first tab. I handed Sergeant Miller the original deed to my house, proving I was the sole owner and the primary financier. I showed him my pristine bank statements, highlighting my steady income and clean withdrawal history. I laid out the audit trail, proving my parents were drowning in debt due to my sister's failed business ventures. Then I pulled out the trump card. I reached into my purse and retrieved the folded sheet of heavy parchment I had taken from the coffee shop earlier that morning. I placed the forged power of attorney on top of the binder. I explained that my parents were not victims. They were desperate debtors. I told the officers that my parents had tried to trick me into signing that exact document just a few hours prior in an attempt to steal the very house we were standing inside. Sergeant Miller picked up the paper. His eyes narrowed as he read the text. He traced the bright red circles I had drawn around the hidden clauses granting fiduciary control. He looked at the fake bank header I had crossed out. I told the officers they were welcome to subpoena the security footage from the downtown cafe. I gave them the exact timestamp of our meeting. I explained that when I caught them in the act and demanded they repay the $12,000 they stole from me a decade ago, my mother panicked. She ran straight to the precinct to file a preemptive strike, hoping to discredit me before I could report her forgery. The younger officer looked at the forged power of attorney, then looked at my organized financial records. The narrative shifted instantly in their minds. The tension in their shoulders dropped. They realized they had been weaponized in a civil dispute. They were being used as pawns by a frantic woman trying to escape the consequences of her own crimes. Sergeant Miller's expression hardened into a glare of cold authority. He asked for my mother's cell phone number. He dialed her number from his department-issued phone and put the call on speaker. It rang twice before Brenda answered. Her voice dripped with fake, trembling concern. She asked the officer if they had recovered her stolen property yet. She asked if they were putting me in handcuffs and bringing me to the station. Sergeant Miller did not play along. His voice was sharp steel. He informed Brenda that he was standing in my office, reviewing my pristine financial documents and holding a forged power of attorney she had presented to me that morning. The line went dead silent. I could hear my mother's ragged breathing through the tiny speaker. He told my mother that filing a false police report is a serious criminal offense. He stated that using law enforcement resources to harass a family member over a financial dispute would not be tolerated. He warned her that if she called the precinct one more time with fabricated claims, he would personally drive to her house and arrest her for perjury. He hung up the phone before she could offer a single excuse. The officers apologized for the intrusion. They assured me I was safe and advised me to consider filing for a formal restraining order if the harassment continued. They walked out of my house, their cruiser pulling away into the dark street. My mother's attempt to use the law against me had backfired. Instead of arresting me, the police were now actively shielding me from her madness. She had closed off her only remaining avenue of attack. I locked the front door and returned to my office. I needed to put my binder back into the safe and finish cooking my dinner. As I gathered the documents, a loose piece of paper slipped from the back pocket of the binder and fluttered onto the hardwood floor. I bent down to pick it up. It was an old file I had transferred from a previous lockbox years ago. It belonged to my late maternal grandfather, who passed away shortly after my 18th birthday. I smoothed the wrinkled paper on my desk. It was an old tax return, misfiled among my own college documents. I scanned the numbers, my eyes catching a discrepancy I had somehow missed when I was a teenager. I traced the routing numbers listed on the second page. I cross-referenced the figures with the date of his death. My blood ran cold. The battle over the forged power of attorney was nothing compared to the secret hidden in these faded ink lines. My parents had not just stolen my college tuition, they had stolen my entire future. The final, devastating layer of their deception was staring right back at me, ready to bring their world crashing down. I stared at the wrinkled paper resting on my mahogany desk. The blue police cruiser had vanished down the street, taking my mother's desperate attempt at intimidation with it. The neighborhood was quiet again. I knelt on the hardwood floor to return my heavy fireproof binder to the steel safe. That was when the faded document slipped from a back pocket and landed near my shoes. It was a tax return. The date stamped in the top corner read 10 years prior. The name printed across the top belonged to my maternal grandfather, Hector. He passed away just a few months after my 18th birthday. Hector was a quiet, practical man who worked for the railway his entire life. He always told me I had a sharp mind for numbers. He never praised Tiffany for her superficial hobbies or her constant demands for attention. He saw right through my parents and their endless posturing. I picked up the paper and smoothed the creases. I had likely shoved it into the binder years ago while helping my father organize his messy filing cabinets. At the time, I was just a stressed teenager trying to keep our household organized. Tonight, I was a certified fraud examiner. My eyes naturally drifted to Schedule B, the section detailing interest and ordinary dividends. A specific line item caught my attention. It listed an educational trust account. The balance recorded prior to his death was $200,000. My breathing slowed. I pulled my desk chair out and sat down. I turned on my secondary monitor and opened a secure background check portal I often use for corporate audits. I typed the tax identification number listed on the faded return. I needed to see the history of this trust. The digital records populated on my screen. The trust was established when I was 12 years old. The sole beneficiary listed was Rashima Garcia. The stipulations were crystal clear. The funds were strictly designated for my university tuition housing and educational expenses. My grandfather had built a safety net to ensure I could attend any college I wanted, shielding the money from my father's terrible spending habits. I clicked the Transaction History tab. The screen loaded a series of bank transfers. 2 months after Hector died, I was sitting in my childhood bedroom crying over college rejection letters because I could not afford the out-of-state tuition. During that exact same week, someone initiated a total liquidation of the $200,000 trust. I pulled the digitized withdrawal slip from the county archives. I stared at the signature line. The ink formed my name, but the handwriting belonged to my mother. Brenda had forged my signature. She and Richard were listed as the temporary executors of my grandfather's estate. They used that temporary power to bypass the bank's security protocols, drain the educational fund, and route the cash into a private joint checking account. My hands felt cold. The $12,000 they stole from my high school savings account was just pocket change. They had robbed me of $250,000 while watching me struggle to pay for community college textbooks. I needed to know where the money went. $200,000 does not just disappear into thin air. I opened the property records database for Marion County. I searched my parents' names during that specific calendar year. Nothing unusual appeared. Then I searched Tiffany's name. A property deed flashed onto the monitor. 10 years ago, a luxury downtown condo was purchased in cash under Tiffany's name. The purchase price was exactly $195,000. While I was working 3 part-time jobs and taking night classes, my parents bought my teenage sister a high-end piece of real estate using my stolen inheritance. I clicked the subsequent property history. Tiffany lived in that condo for 2 years. She never paid the property taxes. She never paid the exorbitant homeowner association fees. She took out a predatory title loan against the property to fund a brief, disastrous attempt at launching a boutique clothing brand. She defaulted on everything. The bank foreclosed on the condo 24 months after it was purchased. My grandfather's life savings, the money he earned working decades on the railway to secure my future, was squandered on my sister's delusion and lost to a commercial lender. I leaned back in my chair, The glow of the monitors cast a harsh light across the room. For a decade, my parents cultivated a very specific narrative about me. At every Thanksgiving dinner, at every family gathering, they toasted to my independence. They called me the strong one. They told their friends I was so naturally resilient that I never needed their help. When I bought my own car, they patted themselves on the back for teaching me the value of hard work. When I secured my accounting degree, they claimed their tough love made me successful. Every single compliment was a calculated lie. They did not call me strong because they admired me. They called me strong to justify their theft. They praised my resilience so they would not feel guilty about forcing me to survive on scraps while they handed a fortune to their golden child. My stability was merely a convenient excuse for their financial crimes. I looked at the forged power of attorney still resting on my desk. Just a few hours ago, I gave them a 24-hour deadline to return $12,000. I threatened them with a police report. I thought I was teaching them a lesson about boundaries. I was thinking too small. This was no longer a petty dispute over a ruined birthday dinner. This was not just about an entitled sister wanting a free house. This was a decade-long systematic financial crime. They had stolen my past. Now they were actively trying to steal my future. The anger burning in my chest did not explode. It froze. It turned into a block of solid ice. Yelling at them would accomplish nothing. Confronting them with the truth would only give them time to manufacture another lie, another fake medical emergency, another false police report. They operated on emotion. I operated on leverage. I picked up my phone. I ignored the missed calls from my father. I did not care what excuses they were currently plotting. My grandfather's estate was never properly closed. By law, when an executor commits fraud against a named beneficiary, their legal authority is immediately voided. My parents still controlled a modest stock portfolio and a small vacation cabin located in southern Indiana, the last remaining pieces of my grandfather's legacy. They used the dividends from those stocks to pay their own country club membership fees. I opened my contacts list and scrolled down to the letter M. Marcus Thorne was the original estate attorney who drafted my grandfather's will. He was a sharp, meticulous lawyer who despised financial negligence. I had met him briefly at the funeral, a stern man in a gray suit who offered me his business card and told me to call if I ever needed guidance. I kept that card for 10 years. I drafted a secure email to his legal firm. I attached the digitized tax return. I attached the forged withdrawal slip containing my mother's handwriting. I attached the property records proving the purchase and subsequent foreclosure of Tiffany's condo. I wrote a concise, objective summary outlining the exact nature of the embezzlement. I requested an emergency injunction. I instructed Marcus to file the necessary paperwork to strip Richard and Brenda of their executor status. I wanted the court to appoint me as the sole conservator of the remaining estate, pending a full criminal fraud investigation. I hit send. I closed the laptop. The digital trail was secured. The trap was set. My parents spent my entire life assuming I would eventually fold under their pressure. They expected me to remain the obedient, strong daughter who absorbed their abuse in silence. They were about to learn what happens when the strong one finally stops protecting them. The financial guillotine was hoisted high into the air. I walked into my kitchen, turned on the stove, and began cooking my dinner. Tomorrow morning, Marcus Thorne would open his email. The legal machinery would grind to life. My parents thought they were struggling because Tiffany faced an eviction notice. They had no idea the real nightmare was just beginning. The courts were about to freeze every single asset they had left, stripping away the last remnants of their fake wealth. The following morning, at precisely 8 o'clock, my cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed the prestigious downtown law firm of Marcus Thorne. I answered the call while pouring my first cup of black coffee. Marcus did not bother with pleasantries. His voice was crisp, professional, and laced with unmistakable outrage. He informed me he had reviewed the encrypted files I sent the previous night. During his 30 years practicing probate law, he had witnessed families fight over inheritances, but outright forgery by an executor to steal a child's educational fund crossed a severe legal line. He asked how quickly I could reach his office. I told him I was already grabbing my car keys. I arrived at his firm 20 minutes later. Marcus stood behind a sprawling oak desk, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing a tailored charcoal suit. He was a veteran of the legal system, a man who built his career protecting the final wishes of hardworking people like my grandfather. He gestured for me to sit in the leather chair opposite him. A printed copy of my grandfather's original trust document rested on his desk alongside the forged withdrawal slip and the property records detailing Tiffany's foreclosed condo. Marcus removed his wire-rimmed glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He stated that Hector was a meticulous man. My grandfather spent 40 years working double shifts on the railway, saving every spare dollar to ensure his descendants would never face the financial struggles he endured. He established that trust specifically to shield the money from my father's notoriously reckless spending habits. My parents had bypassed that shield by committing a federal crime. Marcus explained the legal reality of our situation. When an executor breaches their fiduciary duty through embezzlement, the court does not simply issue a warning. The state acts swiftly to protect the remaining assets. My parents had drained the $200,000 educational fund, but Hector's estate still contained two vital components. There was a modest stock portfolio generating quarterly dividends and a small paid-off vacation cabin nestled in the southern Indiana woods. For 10 years, Richard and Brenda had maintained control over those remaining assets. They treated the stock dividends as their personal slush fund. Marcus pulled a blank legal pad toward him and uncapped his fountain pen. He outlined our counterattack. We were not going to send a demand letter. We were not going to negotiate. We were going to file an emergency ex parte petition with the Marion County Probate Court. We would present the undeniable proof of their forgery to a judge and demand their immediate removal as executors. I nodded, feeling the cold satisfaction of justice snapping into place. By noon, Marcus and I sat in a quiet courtroom. The probate judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, reviewed the file. She scrutinized the forged signature. She examined the timeline linking the stolen cash to the purchase of my sister's luxury condo. Numbers tell a story that tears and manipulation cannot defeat. The judge did not hesitate. She picked up her gavel and signed the emergency order. With a single stroke of her pen, Richard and Brenda Garcia were legally stripped of all authority over Hector's estate. Their access was revoked. The judge then appointed me as the sole temporary conservator of the trust, granting me exclusive legal control over every remaining asset, pending a full criminal investigation into the missing funds. Marcus handed me the certified court order bearing the official county seal. The heavy paper felt like a shield. I thanked him and left the courthouse and drove directly to the wealth management branch where the estate accounts were held. I walked into the polished marble lobby and requested a meeting with the branch manager. I sat in a quiet glass office and slid the court order across the desk. The manager read the judge's decree, his expression shifting from polite customer service to serious compliance. He immediately locked the system, overriding my parents' old credentials. He turned his monitor toward me, allowing me to review the current state of the accounts as the new legal conservator. My forensic training kicked in as I scanned the ledgers. The stock portfolio was still generating thousands of dollars in quarterly dividends. I checked the routing history to see where that money was flowing. The truth was laid bare on the screen. My parents had set up automatic recurring transfers. The dividends from my grandfather's hard-earned investments were being siphoned directly into Richard's checking account to pay his exorbitant country club membership dues. Another automatic transfer was routed directly to a premium debit card issued in Tiffany's name. My sister was using our deceased grandfather's money to fund her daily expensive coffee habits, her designer clothing purchases, and the endless overhead costs of her fake lifestyle coaching business. They were surviving on the ghost of my grandfather's labor. I looked at the branch manager and issued my first directive as the conservator. I instructed him to terminate every single recurring transfer. He clicked his mouse. The country club payment link vanished. I told him to freeze the premium trust debit card assigned to my sister. He typed a rapid sequence on his keyboard. The status icon next to Tiffany's card turned from green to a stark, unyielding red. Finally, I ordered him to place a hard lock on the remaining cash balance, ensuring no funds could be withdrawn without my physical signature and direct authorization. The manager confirmed the changes. The financial pipeline was officially cemented shut. I walked out of the bank and stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight. A profound sense of peace settled over my shoulders. For my entire life, my family had operated under the delusion that they were invincible. They believed they could demand my house, steal my tuition, and ruin my career without ever facing a consequence. They thought they held all the power because they were willing to lie louder than I was willing to fight. They failed to understand that true power does not require shouting. True power is a quiet, binding, legal document. I got into my car and placed the certified court order on the passenger seat. The financial guillotine had dropped. My parents no longer had access to the stock dividends to cover their mounting debts. They could no longer hide behind my grandfather's money. They were mathematically isolated. More importantly, my sister was now holding a piece of useless plastic. Tiffany was currently operating under the assumption that her trust debit card was a bottomless well of free cash. She relied on that specific card to maintain the illusion of her wealthy, successful lifestyle. I knew her patterns. Whenever she felt threatened or insecure, she spent exorbitant amounts of money to soothe her fragile ego. Facing an eviction notice and a repossessed vehicle, she would inevitably try to purchase her way out of her depression. She was about to discover that the safety net she took for granted had been legally incinerated. I started the engine and steered my car toward my quiet, secure home. I had secured my borders. I had reclaimed my stolen legacy. Now all I had to do was wait for reality to catch up with my sister's delusions. Somewhere in the city, Tiffany was undoubtedly planning a grand gesture to prove she was still on top of the world. She was walking straight into a trap forged by her own greed, and the ensuing public humiliation would be a spectacle entirely of her own making. Tiffany operates on a very specific psychological loop. When reality threatens to crush her fragile ego, she does not retreat. She doubles down on the delusion. Facing a looming apartment eviction and a repossessed luxury vehicle, a rational person would cancel their social calendar, sell their designer clothes, and secure a cheap place to live. My sister decided the best solution was to throw a $20,000 relaunch party for her fake lifestyle coaching brand. She booked the grand ballroom at a premier boutique hotel in downtown Indianapolis. She believed that projecting extreme wealth would magically generate actual wealth. More importantly, she believed the premium trust debit card tucked inside her velvet clutch was still active. She spent the entire afternoon directing florists and lighting technicians, sipping complimentary champagne provided by the hotel staff. She invited local social media influencers, potential investors, and high society friends who only associated with her because she routinely picked up the heavy bar tabs. She was desperate to prove to the world that she was a thriving, untouchable entrepreneur. She had signed a binding venue contract agreeing to pay the final 50% of the vendor costs just before the main course was served. She assumed our parents would simply absorb the massive expense using our grandfather's dividends, just as they had done 100 times before. The evening began exactly as Tiffany envisioned. A professional string quartet played classical music in the corner of the ballroom. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays, holding expensive caviar hors d'oeuvres. Tiffany wore a rented silk gown, holding court near the center of the room. She posed for endless photographs, laughing loudly and pitching her upcoming wellness retreats to anyone who would listen. She was the undisputed center of attention. She felt invincible. At exactly 8:30, the event coordinator approached Tiffany. The coordinator, a stern woman wearing a tailored black pantsuit, carried a digital payment terminal and a leather folder containing the final invoices. The time had come to settle the remaining balance for the premium catering, the top-shelf open bar, and the extensive custom floral arrangements. Tiffany did not even pause her conversation. She casually reached into her purse, pulled out the heavy metal trust debit card, and handed it over without looking at the total. The coordinator swiped the card through the terminal. The machine emitted a sharp beep. A red warning light flashed across the small screen. The transaction declined. The coordinator politely informed my sister that the payment did not process. She suggested it might be a daily spending limit issue and asked for a secondary form of payment. Tiffany offered a tight, annoyed smile. She blamed the bank for being overly cautious with her immense wealth. She reached back into her clutch and produced our mother's emergency credit card. She handed it over, apologizing to her gathered friends for the minor inconvenience. The machine beeped again. Another red light illuminated the terminal. Declined. Tiffany's arrogant smile faltered. The coordinator's polite demeanor vanished instantly. In the hospitality industry, vendors do not run their businesses on promises or social status. They run on cleared funds. The coordinator explained that the caterers required the final $10,000 payment before they would plate the filet mignon and lobster tail main courses. Tiffany stepped away from her circle of friends, her voice dropping to a frantic, breathy whisper. She ordered the coordinator to just run the cards again, claiming there must be a glitch in the hotel banking system. The coordinator tried a third time. The result remained exactly the same. She looked at my sister, her expression turning hard and unforgiving. She stated that unless Tiffany could produce a valid wire transfer or a working card right that second, the event was officially canceled. Tiffany began to panic. She pulled out her personal checking debit card, knowing it held less than $40, but swiped it anyway out of sheer desperation. Insufficient funds. The coordinator did not argue. She simply raised her hand and signaled the banquet captain standing near the kitchen doors. The fallout was instantaneous. The waiters carrying the silver trays turned around and marched right back through the swinging doors. The bartenders at the premium open bar began placing caps back onto the liquor bottles and locking the heavy wooden cabinets. The guests who had been laughing and enjoying the free drinks stopped and stared in utter confusion. The string quartet packed up their instruments and walked off the stage. The humiliation escalated from a quiet dispute to a very public spectacle. The rental company crew, who had been waiting in the loading dock for their final check, marched straight into the ballroom. They did not care about Tiffany's curated social status. They cared about getting paid. When the coordinator told them the funds were non-existent, the crew began breaking down the event while the attendees were still standing in the room. Men in heavy work boots started dismantling the custom lighting rigs. The soft, flattering pink illumination abruptly cut out, replaced by the harsh, bright fluorescent cleaning lights of the hotel. Another crew member began pulling the silk tablecloths off the empty tables. They started stacking the gold chairs, pushing the guests out of the way. The influencers and high society friends whispered among themselves. They pulled out their smartphones not to take glamorous photos of Tiffany's success, but to text each other about her spectacular downfall. They watched the fake executive get exposed as a fraud in real time. People began grabbing their coats and walking toward the exit, casting pitying and disgusted glances toward my sister as they abandoned the ruined party. Tiffany could not handle the stares. Her manufactured reality was shattering in front of the exact audience she desperately wanted to impress. She covered her face, turned away from the collapsing ballroom, and sprinted down the hallway. She pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the ladies' restroom and locked herself inside the largest stall. She sank to the cold tile floor, ruining the hem of her rented silk gown. Her chest heaved. The illusion was dead. She pulled her phone from her clutch. Her fingers shook as she bypassed our parents' contact numbers. She knew they were broke. She knew they could not save her. In her moment of ultimate crisis, she reverted to the only habit she truly trusted. She dialed my number, expecting her older sister to fix the mess. I was sitting on my living room sofa reading a novel and drinking a cup of chamomile tea. The house was quiet. The legal boundaries I established earlier that day provided a deep, satisfying sense of peace. When my phone vibrated on the coffee table, I saw Tiffany's name flashing on the screen. I picked up the device and pressed accept. I did not offer a greeting. Tiffany bypassed any polite introduction. She was hyperventilating, crying so hard she was choking on her own tears. She shrieked into the speaker, her voice echoing off the bathroom tiles. She screamed that her relaunch party was ruined. She sobbed that the vendors were packing up the food and her friends were laughing at her. She demanded I transfer $15,000 into her checking account immediately. She claimed her life was over, her reputation was destroyed, and it was all my fault for being so selfish. She threw a tantrum, expecting the sheer volume of her guilt trip to force my hand. She expected me to hear her crying and instantly revert to my old role as the family ATM. I listened to her sob. I listened to the frantic breaths and the desperate, entitled demands. I let her speak for 5 full seconds, absorbing the panic in her voice. I felt no pity. I felt no urge to rescue her. I recognized that her tears were not born of genuine remorse, but from the terror of finally facing the consequences of her own financial recklessness. I lowered my teacup onto the coaster. I spoke into the receiver, keeping my voice level, cold, and precise. consider yourself disowned. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button. I ended the call. I immediately opened her contact profile and pressed block. I used the exact same words my father had used to throw me out of the steakhouse just a few days prior. They had tried to discard me to protect her unearned luxury. Now those same words sealed her public destruction. I took a slow sip of my tea. My sister was trapped in a bathroom stall surrounded by unpaid vendors and fleeing guests holding a declined debit card. The financial pipeline was severed. However, I knew my family dynamics too well to assume this was the end of the conflict. Public humiliation does not make entitled people reflect on their bad behavior. It makes them highly erratic. Stripped of their fake wealth, locked out of their trust accounts, and facing genuine poverty for the first time in their lives, my mother and sister were about to lose their minds. They would not accept defeat gracefully. They would attempt to take what they believed was rightfully theirs by force. They were about to make the most reckless decision of their lives, crossing a physical boundary that would guarantee their own ruin. 2 days after my sister ruined her own relaunch party, my accounting firm sent me to Chicago for a weekend corporate leadership retreat. I sat in my high-rise hotel room looking out at the city lights, reviewing a stack of quarterly reports. The room was quiet. My phone rested on the glass desk beside my laptop. At 9:15 in the evening, the screen illuminated. A sharp, distinct chime cut through the silence. It was not a text message or a work email. It was a critical alert from my home smart security system. I tapped the notification. The application opened instantly, displaying the live video feed from the camera mounted above my back patio in Indiana. The night vision technology rendered the footage in crisp, high-definition detail. 2 figures were dragging heavy luggage across my manicured lawn. I leaned forward, zooming in on the screen. It was my mother and my sister. Tiffany looked like a walking nightmare. She was still wearing the same rented silk gown from her disastrous hotel event, but the fabric was now stained, wrinkled, and torn at the hem. Her makeup was smeared across her cheeks, leaving dark tracks down her face. Brenda trailed behind her, struggling to carry 2 rolled-up air mattresses and a large canvas tote bag. Their posture radiated exhaustion and raw desperation. The 72-hour eviction notice had officially expired. The county sheriff had locked Tiffany out of her luxury downtown apartment that morning. With their bank accounts frozen, their credit destroyed, and the trust funds cemented shut by a judge, they had nowhere else to turn. They were officially homeless. They stopped at my glass patio door. I watched my mother pull a heavy brass flashlight from her tote bag. She did not hesitate. Brenda wrapped the base of the flashlight in a hand towel, reared her arm back, and smashed the heavy metal against the glass pane near the handle. The glass shattered inward, raining down onto my pristine hardwood floor. My mother reached her hand through the jagged hole, flipped the interior deadbolt, and pushed the door wide open. They dragged their heavy suitcases inside, tracking mud and broken glass into my kitchen. They actually believed this plan would work. In my mother's distorted reality, possession was 9/10 of the law. She figured that if they physically occupied my house while I was out of town, they could establish legal residency. They assumed I would return from Chicago, find them sleeping in my living room, and simply surrender out of sheer exhaustion. They thought I would lack the spine to throw my own flesh and blood onto the street. They treated the law like a mere suggestion, assuming our family ties provided them with total immunity from consequences. My smart security system did not blare a loud siren. I had configured the system to trigger a silent alarm, sending an immediate dispatch signal directly to the local police department. I sat in my hotel room hundreds of miles away, watching the crime unfold in real time. I did not use the 2-way speaker feature to warn them. I let them unpack. I watched Tiffany drag her suitcase into my living room, complaining aloud about her sore feet. I watched Brenda unroll a cheap air mattress across my expensive rug. They were acting like entitled tourists checking into a resort. They were so consumed by their own arrogance, they did not realize a trap was closing tightly around them. 3 minutes later, the reflection of flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of my living room. The police response was incredibly fast. The dispatcher had noted the address on the screen. It was the exact same address where Brenda had filed her false police report just a few days prior. The local precinct was already highly familiar with my mother's criminal tendencies. The video feed captured heavy boots approaching my front porch. I switched my phone view to the doorbell camera. 4 uniformed officers stood on my front steps. One of them held the heavy leather leash of a German Shepherd canine unit. The dog stood at strict attention, ready to work. The lead officer was Sergeant Miller, the same man who had stood in my home office and realized my mother was trying to frame me for theft. He did not bother knocking gently. He used his heavy flashlight to pound on the thick wooden door loudly, announcing the police presence. Inside the living room, Brenda and Tiffany froze. Their arrogant entitlement evaporated in a single second, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. Tiffany dropped a throw pillow. Brenda looked toward the shattered back door, realizing there was no escape route. Before they could formulate a lie, Sergeant Miller and his team moved quickly around the side of the house. They entered through the broken patio door, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The interior security cameras captured every second of the confrontation. The officers ordered the intruders to step away from the luggage and place their hands in the air. Tiffany began shrieking. She waved her arms, yelling that she was a wealthy business owner and the officers were trespassing on her family property. Brenda tried to play the victim once again. She fell to her knees among the broken glass, crying loudly, claiming she was just a concerned mother checking on her daughter's house. Sergeant Miller recognized her instantly. He did not entertain her lies. He knew she had a history of filing false reports and manipulating the truth. He instructed his deputies to secure the suspects. The officers pushed Brenda against the wall and locked heavy metal handcuffs around her wrists. Tiffany fought back, slapping at an officer's arm to protect her ruined designer gown. The officer spun her around without hesitation, secured her wrists tightly behind her back, and marched her toward the front door. I watched the high-definition footage as my sister and mother were paraded out the front door and down my illuminated driveway. Neighbors had stepped onto their porches, standing in the cool night air, watching the spectacle unfold. Tiffany sobbed uncontrollably as the officers pressed her head down and shoved her into the back of a marked squad car. Brenda followed right behind her, weeping in genuine terror as the heavy metal door slammed shut, locking her inside the cage. The physical boundary of my home was defended by the strict, unforgiving application of the law. I saved the recorded footage directly to my secure cloud server. I called my local emergency glass repair service to board up the patio door until I returned home. Then I set my phone down, closed my laptop, and prepared for bed. My family tried to take my house by force, and they earned themselves a direct trip to the county jail. The charges for felony breaking and entering, combined with the property damage, carried severe legal penalties. The next time I saw my parents, it would not be across a steakhouse table or in a crowded coffee shop. It would be inside a sterile mediation room where they would finally face the devastating reality of their own greed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Marion County Courthouse mediation room. The space was sterile, featuring bare beige walls and a heavy imitation wood conference table. There were no windows. The stale air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I sat on one side of the table. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer and kept my posture perfectly straight. Marcus Thorne sat beside me, his briefcase resting on the floor, a thick black binder placed squarely in front of him. Across the table sat the remnants of my family. My father looked like he had aged a decade in a matter of days. Richard always prided himself on projecting the image of a successful, upper-crust patriarch. For years, he judged his neighbors based on the brands of their lawnmowers and the makes of their cars. He used to mock people who could not afford private legal representation. Today, his shoulders slumped beneath a wrinkled dress shirt that hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight, dark circles bruised the skin beneath his eyes. Sitting next to him was a court-appointed public defender. The overworked attorney looked exhausted, checking his watch and flipping through a thin file folder. He knew this was a losing battle. Brenda and Tiffany sat on the far side of their lawyer. My father had managed to secure a high-interest bail bond to get them out of a holding cell, but the experience had clearly broken them. Tiffany wore cheap gray sweatpants and a faded hoodie. Her hair hung in greasy strands. The arrogant lifestyle coach who threw a $20,000 hotel party just a week prior was entirely gone. Brenda stared down at her hands, picking nervously at her cuticles. They were facing serious felony trespassing charges, property damage, and the looming threat of federal fraud indictments. The public defender cleared his throat. He attempted to open the discussion by suggesting a pre-trial diversion program. He asked if the victims would be willing to drop the criminal charges in exchange for a civil settlement. I did not speak. I let the silence hang in the air, forcing my father to look at me. Richard shifted in his uncomfortable plastic chair. He leaned forward, attempting to summon his old authoritarian tone. His voice shook, betraying his profound desperation. He looked across the table and delivered the most absurd, manipulative proposal I had ever heard in my life. He told me that this entire situation had spiraled out of control. He claimed that the police and the lawyers were tearing our family apart over simple misunderstandings. He reminded me that blood is thicker than water. Then he offered his grand compromise. He asked me to contact the district attorney and drop the breaking and entering charges against my mother and sister. He asked me to drop the fraud investigation regarding my grandfather's stolen educational trust. In exchange, he promised they would finally stop asking me for money. He suggested that since I lived in a large 4-bedroom suburban house all by myself, I had plenty of unused space. He proposed that he, Brenda, and Tiffany move into my finished basement. He painted it as a favor to me. He claimed I was lonely. He promised that if I just gave them a place to sleep and a second chance, they would finally act like a real family. He offered me the very thing they had withheld my entire life: basic parental affection, but only if I surrendered my home and my legal leverage. It was the ultimate trap. They wanted to invade my sanctuary, avoid prison, and establish legal residency under my roof. They started this journey by demanding the deed to my house at a steakhouse dinner. Now, facing total ruin, they were begging for the basement. I looked at my father. I felt no anger. I felt no sadness. I only felt a cold, clinical detachment. I turned my head slightly and nodded to Marcus. My attorney did not offer a polite smile. He did not entertain the public defender's request for a diversion program. Marcus placed his hands flat on the thick black binder resting on the table. He pushed it forward. The heavy binder slid across the imitation wood surface, stopping just inches from my father's trembling hands. Marcus spoke with the sharp, unforgiving precision of a seasoned litigator. He informed my father that there would be no civil settlements. There would be no plea deals. There would certainly be no one moving into my basement. He stated that forgiveness was not on the agenda today. The only item on the table was the mathematical reality of their crimes. He instructed Richard to open the binder. My father hesitated, his hands shaking as he flipped the heavy plastic cover. Marcus walked them through the forensic audit I had prepared. He pointed to the first tab. It contained the high-definition security footage stills of Brenda smashing my glass patio door with a flashlight. He noted that the county prosecutor had already reviewed the footage. The breaking and entering charges were airtight. A jury would convict them in less than an hour. Marcus told them to flip to the second tab. Richard turned the page. He stared at the digitized copy of my grandfather's tax return and the forged withdrawal slip from the educational trust. Marcus explained that embezzling $250,000 from a named beneficiary carries a mandatory minimum sentence in the state of Indiana. He looked directly at my mother. Brenda shrank into her chair, her face turning the color of ash. She realized her sloppy forgery had finally caught up with her. Then Marcus delivered the final blow to their pride. He instructed my father to look at the third tab. He told the room that Richard's proposal to move into my basement was not born out of a desire for family unity. It was born out of impending homelessness. My father's eyes scanned the document, his jaw clenched tight. Marcus read the financial figures aloud for the public defender and the rest of the room to hear. The document was a formal notice of default filed by their mortgage lender. Richard and Brenda had missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments on their own home. During the exact same months they were funding Tiffany's failed wellness app and paying the lease on her luxury SUV, they had stopped paying their own housing costs. The illusion of their middle-class superiority shattered into a million jagged pieces on the conference table. For my entire life, my parents walked around acting like they were financial geniuses. They looked down on people who struggled. They called me selfish for wanting to keep my own paychecks. They funded Tiffany's luxurious delusions to prove to the world that they were wealthy enough to afford a spoiled daughter. The truth was laid bare in black and white ink. They were mathematically bankrupt. The bank had initiated active foreclosure proceedings. Their cars were gone, their credit scores were ruined. The trust fund dividends they used to pay their country club dues were legally frozen by a judge. They had absolutely nothing left. Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. He told my father that you cannot negotiate when you hold zero leverage. You cannot bargain with stolen money. He informed the public defender that we intended to cooperate fully with the district attorney to ensure maximum sentencing for the property damage, the trespassing, and the historic fraud. Tiffany began to cry, a soft, pathetic whimpering sound. She looked at our parents, waiting for them to fix the situation. She waited for Richard to pound his fist on the table and demand respect. She waited for Brenda to yell and manipulate the room. Neither of them moved. Richard stared at the foreclosure notice, realizing the house he prized over his own daughter was gone. Brenda stared at the floor, terrified of the prison cell waiting for her. The power dynamic was permanently destroyed. They were not strict parents disciplining an unruly child. They were desperate criminals facing a judge. But the audit binder was not the final piece of evidence Marcus brought to the mediation room. My parents thought losing their house and facing criminal charges was the worst possible outcome. They assumed they had hit rock bottom. They did not know that my grandfather Hector was a man who planned for every contingency. When he drafted his will decades ago, he anticipated my father's greed. He knew Richard might try to steal the inheritance. Marcus reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a single sealed envelope bearing the wax stamp of his law firm. The true punishment was not going to come from a criminal court judge. The ultimate consequence was written by a ghost. Marcus broke the wax seal, preparing to read a hidden legal clause that would ensure my parents and my sister lost far more than just their freedom. Marcus held the sealed envelope in the center of the mediation table. The thick ivory paper bore a dark red wax seal stamped with the emblem of his law firm. The harsh fluorescent lights of the courthouse conference room reflected off the polished mahogany surface. The stale air grew heavy. My father stared at the envelope, his sunken eyes tracking every minor movement my attorney made. Richard understood traditional legal threats. He understood foreclosure notices and criminal charges. But this envelope represented something unknown, and the unknown terrified him. Marcus ran his thumb over the wax seal. He looked directly at my father. Before opening the document, Marcus took a moment to discuss my grandfather. Hector was a man who spent 40 years walking miles of steel track, repairing railway lines in the bitter Indiana winters. He understood the value of a hard-earned dollar. He also possessed a remarkable judge of character. Whenever my father attended family gatherings, Richard would boast about imaginary investments and wear cheap suits tailored to look expensive. Hector saw right through the facade. My grandfather knew Richard was a man who valued appearance over integrity, a man who would take shortcuts whenever presented with the opportunity. Because Hector anticipated my father's inherent greed, he instructed Marcus to draft a secondary, confidential addendum to the primary trust. It was an insurance policy designed to protect the true beneficiaries from predators within their own family. Marcus slid his silver letter opener beneath the flap. The wax cracked with a sharp, echoing snap. My mother flinched at the sound. Tiffany stopped her quiet whimpering, her eyes darting between the lawyer and the envelope. The public defender leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. He recognized a checkmate when he saw one. He was no longer participating in a negotiation. He was simply a witness to an execution. Marcus withdrew a single sheet of heavy, aged parchment. The bottom corner featured my grandfather's bold, unmistakable signature in black ink, dated more than a decade ago. The attorney placed the paper flat on the table and began to read aloud. His voice was calm, precise, and devoid of any sympathy. The document outlined a specific legal stipulation known in estate planning as a poison pill. Hector had mandated a strict code of conduct for anyone granted access to his wealth. The clause stated that if any named executor, trustee, or beneficiary engaged in fraud, theft, forgery, or deceit against another family member, their rights to the estate would be immediately and permanently revoked. The terms were uncompromising. A single act of financial betrayal triggered an automatic forfeiture of all current titles and future interests. Marcus looked up from the parchment. He focused his gaze on my father. He explained that by forging my signature on a withdrawal slip 10 years ago to steal my college tuition, Richard and Brenda activated the poison pill. By driving to my house this week and attempting to trick me into signing a fraudulent power of attorney, they confirmed their malicious intent. They had violated the core condition of the trust. Richard gripped the edge of the imitation wood table. His knuckles turned stark white. A nervous sweat beaded on his forehead. He tried to interrupt, his voice cracking into a desperate rasp. He argued that the trust was already empty. He reminded the room that the $200,000 educational fund was gone. He claimed there was nothing left to forfeit. Marcus offered a thin, razor-sharp smile. He informed my father that the educational fund was indeed empty. However, the remaining estate assets were still very much intact. The family stock portfolio, which generated thousands of dollars in quarterly dividends, and the paid-off vacation cabin in the southern Indiana woods, were still sitting under the estate umbrella. Those two remaining assets carried a combined market value of roughly $150,000. For the past week, as the eviction notices piled up and the foreclosure warnings arrived in the mail, my father had been harboring a secret backup plan. I knew how his mind worked. Richard figured that even if he lost his suburban home and Tiffany lost her luxury apartment, he still had Hector's money. He planned to liquidate the stock portfolio and sell the vacation cabin. That $150,000 was his retirement safety net. He intended to use my grandfather's final assets to buy a modest condo and start over, shielding himself from the consequences of his own disastrous financial choices. He thought he had a guaranteed escape route. Marcus reached into his briefcase one final time. He pulled out a fresh banking confirmation receipt and a signed judicial order. He placed them directly on top of the poison pill document. The attorney explained that when the probate judge reviewed the evidence of the forgery yesterday afternoon, she did not just freeze the accounts. Because I presented undeniable proof of their crimes, the judge authorized the immediate execution of Hector's final clause. The penalty for forfeiture was specific. Hector dictated that any revoked funds must not be redistributed to other family members. He wanted to ensure the money served a righteous purpose. The clause required the immediate liquidation of all remaining assets, with the total proceeds transferred directly to a registered charity of the executing attorney's choosing. Marcus tapped the banking receipt with his index finger. He announced that at 9 o'clock this morning, the entire stock portfolio was liquidated. The funds were wired directly to the Safe Haven Women's Shelter in downtown Indianapolis, an organization dedicated to providing emergency housing and legal representation for victims of domestic and financial abuse. Furthermore, the vacation cabin was legally transferred to a real estate auction house. The property would be sold to the highest bidder next month, and every single cent of that sale would follow the stocks directly into the charity's operating budget. The room fell into a suffocating, breathless silence. The reality of the math crashed down on my parents. Their secret safety net was gone. The money was already wired. The cabin was already surrendered. My father tried to stand up, but his legs betrayed him. He sank back into his plastic chair, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale yellow. He stared at the banking receipt, watching his entire future evaporate into thin air. My mother covered her mouth with both hands. A low, guttural moan escaped her throat. She rocked back and forth in her seat. The denial that had fueled her arrogance for decades finally shattered. She could no longer blame a bank error. She could no longer blame an ungrateful daughter. She was staring at the direct, undeniable result of her own greed. Tiffany looked back and forth between our parents, her eyes wide with fresh horror. She whispered our father's name, asking him to fix it. She begged him to tell the lawyer to give the money back. She reminded him that she needed cash to hire a defense attorney for her criminal trespassing charges. Richard did not answer her. He could not even look at her. He buried his face in his trembling hands, letting out a ragged, defeated breath. They had sacrificed everything to maintain their illusion of wealth. They stole my tuition to buy a condo that went into foreclosure. They tried to steal my house to pay off their maxed-out credit cards. Because they could not control their endless appetite for unearned luxury, they triggered a hidden trap that wiped out their last remaining dollar. Their greed literally zeroed out their own existence. They did not just lose an estranged daughter today. They lost their home, They lost their freedom. They lost their retirement. They walked into this mediation room hoping to manipulate me into letting them sleep in my basement. Now they were walking out of this courthouse with criminal charges hanging over their heads, represented by a public defender, and facing actual, inescapable poverty. I sat quietly on my side of the table, watching the devastation settle over them. I felt no pity. I felt no lingering trauma. I only felt the profound, grounding satisfaction of a perfectly balanced ledger. Forensic accounting relies on a simple premise. Every transaction leaves a paper trail, and every debt must eventually be paid. Today, my family paid their debt in full. Marcus closed his heavy black binder. The sharp thud of the plastic cover echoed like a gavel striking a block. He looked at the public defender and informed him that our side of the mediation was concluded. We would see them at the criminal arraignment. I stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from my charcoal blazer, and pushed my chair under the table. I did not offer a goodbye. I turned my back on the people who spent 28 years mistaking my patience for weakness. I walked toward the heavy wooden door, ready to step out of that sterile room and into a future built entirely on my own terms. 6 months have passed since the heavy wooden door of the mediation room clicked shut behind me. The harsh winter thawed into a bright, welcoming Indiana spring. I stood in my kitchen this morning, listening to the quiet hum of the coffee maker. The silence in my home is no longer a temporary pause between family disasters. The silence is a permanent fixture. It is a fortified sanctuary I earned through meticulous planning and unyielding boundaries. I poured my dark roast into a ceramic mug and walked toward the back of the house. The shattered patio door was replaced long ago, featuring reinforced glass and upgraded smart locks. I slid the door open and stepped onto the expansive cedar deck. The morning sun broke through the tree line, casting a warm golden glow across my manicured lawn. I took a deep breath of the fresh suburban air. My chest felt incredibly light. The crushing weight of my family's endless demands, their manufactured crises, and their constant deceit was permanently lifted from my shoulders. My professional life flourished the moment I severed those toxic ties. Last month, Harrison called me into the executive suite at the accounting firm. We did not discuss defamatory videos or corporate lawsuits. We discussed my future. Recognizing my ability to remain calm and decisive under intense pressure, the partners promoted me to a senior directorial role. My office moved to a corner suite with a panoramic view of the downtown skyline. I earned a substantial raise, securing my financial independence beyond any doubt. My career was no longer a tool for my parents to exploit. It was a testament to my own dedication. Meanwhile, the people who tried to steal my success are experiencing a vastly different reality. Richard and Brenda did not go to federal prison. They narrowly avoided a cell block by accepting a brutal, unforgiving plea deal orchestrated by the district attorney and my lawyer Marcus Thorne. The prosecutor offered them a harsh choice. They could take their chances with a jury on felony forgery and breaking and entering charges, or they could plead guilty, accept a lengthy probationary period, and agree to a strict court-mandated restitution plan. Terrified of living behind bars, they took the deal. The judge ordered them to repay the stolen $12,000 tuition fund, plus the cost of replacing my patio door, down to the final cent. Their wages are legally garnished. Before they even see a paycheck, a percentage is automatically routed into my savings account. Every single month, they are forced to write a financial apology for their decades of theft. The bank finalized the foreclosure on their suburban house shortly after the mediation. Stripped of my grandfather's trust fund and burdened by their massive credit debts, they could not secure a standard lease. Today, Richard and Brenda live in a cramped, outdated one-bedroom apartment situated near a noisy industrial park on the far outskirts of the city. The thin walls rattle whenever heavy transport trucks rumble down the nearby highway. The illusion of their upper-middle-class superiority evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of poverty they brought upon themselves. My father, the man who used to strut around family gatherings offering unsolicited financial advice and mocking anyone who wore off-brand clothing, now wears a stiff polyester uniform. He took a job as a night shift security guard at a regional logistics warehouse. He spends his nights walking the cold concrete floors, shining a flashlight into dark corners and checking padlocks. His knees ache. His pride is entirely shattered. He is forced to take orders from supervisors half his age, enduring the exact kind of grueling labor he always believed he was too important to perform. My mother's fate is equally humbling. Brenda, who once spent her afternoons browsing boutique stores and judging the neighborhood wives over expensive lunches, now stands on her feet for 8 hours a day at a discount supermarket. She works as a cashier and a bagger. She wears a brightly colored store apron over sensible orthotic shoes. She spends her shifts scanning barcodes and placing canned goods into plastic bags for the very people she used to look down upon. If her drawer comes up short at the end of her shift, she is reprimanded by the teenage store manager. Then there is Tiffany. The luxury apartment eviction went through without a hitch. The county sheriff escorted her out of the downtown loft, and her designer furniture was sold at a public auction to cover the remaining arrears. The auto lender recovered her leased SUV. With no emergency credit cards to max out and no parents capable of funding her lifestyle coaching delusions, Tiffany faced a brutal awakening. Hunger is a powerful motivator. My younger sister, who claimed her creative spirit was too fragile for a traditional career, is now working the drive-through window at a busy fast food franchise. She wears a branded visor and a headset. Her days of sipping complimentary champagne in hotel ballrooms are replaced by the smell of fryer grease and the sound of impatient drivers honking their horns. She takes orders, hands out paper bags, and counts exact change. She has to smile at rude customers who do not care about her curated social media presence. She is learning the true value of $1 the hardest way possible, earning minimum wage while relying on public transportation to get back to the tiny rented room she occupies. They are living the exact lives their choices dictated. Occasionally, they try to test the perimeter of my boundary. A few weeks ago, an unmarked envelope arrived at my office, forwarded through Marcus Thorne. The handwriting belonged to Brenda. The letter was a pathetic attempt at reconciliation, filled with complaints about her sore feet and Richard's terrible work schedule. She claimed they had learned their lesson and begged for a brief phone call, promising they just missed their eldest daughter. I did not read past the first paragraph. I did not feel a familiar tug of guilt. I simply dropped the envelope into the heavy-duty paper shredder beside my desk and listened to the blades grind the paper into dust. Reconciliation requires genuine accountability, and manipulators only apologize when they run out of options. The opposite of love is not hatred. The opposite of love is apathy. I no longer hate my parents or my sister. I simply do not care about them. They are strangers who share my DNA, and their daily struggles are no longer my responsibility to fix. I took another sip of my coffee, feeling the warm ceramic against my palms. I looked at the blooming flowers lining the edge of my patio. For 28 years, my family weaponized the concept of strength against me. They called me the strong one so they could justify neglecting my needs. They praised my resilience so they could steal my resources without feeling remorse. They taught me that being family meant enduring endless disrespect in the name of loyalty. They were wrong. Strength does not mean standing quietly while people empty your pockets and mock your sacrifices. Strength does not mean surrendering your hard-earned sanctuary just because someone else refuses to build their own. True strength is recognizing your inherent worth and refusing to negotiate your peace with emotional terrorists. It is the courage to draw a line in the sand and enforce the consequences when someone steps over it. The steakhouse dinner where they delivered their ultimatum feels like a lifetime ago. They looked me in the eye and told me to give up my house or consider myself disowned. They thought it was a threat. They did not realize they were handing me the greatest gift of my entire life. I chose my house. I chose my career. I chose myself. I turned around and walked back inside my beautiful, quiet home, locking the reinforced glass door behind me. I set my mug on the polished granite counter and prepared to start my day. I have a thriving career to nurture, genuine friendships to cultivate, and a peaceful life to enjoy. I will never look back. The ledger is permanently closed, and my future belongs entirely to me.